everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel DataZald. I am Radhika and we are continuing our DBT series. This is part 2 of macros video. If you have not watched part 1, then I would recommend watching that one first because it gives you the base of what macros are, how do they relate to functions in programming languages, what are the different use cases of macros, what are the best practices that you should be following when you're writing a macro. So I've covered all of these theoretical concepts in the part 1, which was last week. And this week, we are going to dive into creating macros in DBT. So like the practical implementation. If you have not subscribed to my channel, then please do consider subscribing if you're finding these videos helpful and hit the like button. And now without further ado, let's get started. In our previous video, we discussed a few use cases. So the first use case was for standardizing transformations. So in here, what we were doing is we were converting the string into lowercase and then trimming it. But instead of lowercase, what I'm going to do is I'm going to capitalize the first letter and then keep everything lowercase, and it is called as init cap in Snowflake. The reason why I'm doing this is because the columns on which we are defining these transformations, we already have tests defined for it, and I don't want to update the tests and everything. So I'm just going to define it in such a way that those tests will still be valid. So it will make more sense when we are going to apply those transformations. So let's go into our DBT project and start creating those macros. Now from my dbt_project.yml file, we know that our macros path is this macros folder. So I'm going to go into this macros folder and create a new file, and I'm going to call this clean_strings.sql. So we have created this macros file, and in here we're going to define the macro. The way to define macro is we have to start it with a curly brace and a %sign, and in between we're going to first write the keyword macro. This tells DBT that it is a macro, and then we have to give macro's name. So I'm still keeping this as clean strings. So this is my macro name, and then we have to pass the arguments. So this is simply like defining a function. You do def keyword in Python, then give the function's name, and then give the arguments in the brackets. So in a similar way, we're going to define the macro. This is the same Jinja syntax that I'm using from the Jinja video. If you have not watched that video, then watch that one first and come here, because again, that forms the base for these things. So I'm not going to cover everything in detail because I've covered things over there. Now here we have to pass the argument. This is just a column level transformation, nothing to do with the model. We can apply it on any model. So all I'm doing is I'm getting the column name here. Now this is my start of the macro. For end of the macro, again we have to say curly braces, then %, and then say end macro. This is similar to the Jinja template, where if we were starting an if function, then if we were starting a if statement, then we say end if. If we were getting a for loop, then at the end we say end for. Similarly, because we are writing macro, so at the end we have to say end macro. Now here we are going to define our syntax. So all we need to do here is we have to write init cap. So this is initial capital. Then we're going to say trim, and then whatever the column name is. Now we cannot write the column name just like that over here. Pause the video and let me know why this is not the right way to do it. If you have watched my Jinja video, then I'm sure you would know the answer, and I would love to know. So please put your answer in the comments. And for those of you who don't know, the answer to this is because we want the column name to be replaced over here. If we write column name just like this, there is no dynamic content here. So to add the dynamic content, we have to put this inside curly braces. So what these curly braces do is, whatever column name you provide over here, that will come in this place. So it will make more sense when we are going to see the compiled code. But remember that you have to add the curly braces here to add the dynamic content. This is the static part of the SQL, but this is what we have to replace so that we can apply this on different columns. So different column names should come over here. So this column name is a variable, and to get its value, we are putting this inside two curly braces. Now that's it. This is how our macro is defined. It's a simple macro. Now we have to apply it and then execute it. So to apply this macro, what we are going to do is we're going to go into our bronze model. So I'm going into bronze underscore HR underscore data.sql, and here I'm going to apply my macro. So let us first go into our Snowflake. I'm going to insert this particular record. Here I'm adding a new employee with employee number 100117, and for this employee I have department as sales, all uppercase, and I have education field as marketing, all uppercase. So I'm going to apply my clean strings macro on these two particular columns so that this sales becomes S uppercase and ALES, like the rest of the things lowercase with sales, and then M uppercase for marketing. And you will see that how these transformations are applied and how easy it is. So let us first insert this record. Now after inserting, let us just check in our staging model how this looks. So I'm going to say select star from HR analytics staging HR data, where employee number is 100117, and you can see that sales and marketing, they are coming in uppercase. Now let us apply this macro in our DBT model. So in place of department, what we are going to do is we are going to put two curly braces, because that is how we are going to apply the macro. We have to write the macro's name, and then we're going to pass our department, like the column name. Similarly for education field also, we're going to say two curly braces. Inside this we're going to write clean strings. This is our macro's name, and then we have to pass the column name. It is as simple as this. All this macro needed was call this macro and the column name that you want to pass to this macro. When I'm going to save this, if you see the compiled version, you will see that it is adding init cap trim department, init cap trim education field. So you can see that this clean strings is replaced by the contents that were there in the clean strings. So that is why I said that we have to apply these curly braces so that we get different column names like department and education over here. Now we have to save this and run this. So I'm going to open my terminal. In here, first I need to activate my environment. So I'm going to do conda activate dbt underscore env underscore d. This is my virtual environment name, and then I have to do dbt run. Now I'm just going to run this bronze underscore HR underscore data model. So for this we can add select and then provide our model name. So bronze underscore HR underscore data. Now I'm just going to run this. We are not in the right folder, and I forgot to do another thing. So if you look here, we have case statements over here for department. If sales is sales, then we do it like this. So now we don't need these things. We can just simply say department, because that part is taken care by our macro. Similarly for our education fields as well, we don't need these case statements anymore. This is being taken care by our macro. So I'm going to remove these, and now this should be good to go. Let us go into our DBT folder. So cd HR analytics, dbt HR analytics, and then dbt underscore underscore HR analytics. This is where I have dbt underscore project.yml. That is why I have to go here and then run my dbt commands. So now I'm going to do dbt run select bronze underscore HR underscore data. Now this should run smoothly. So yes, this model was successful. Now let us go to our Snowflake, and here I'm going to now query the bronze schema and bronze HR data. And again, I'm going to get this particular employee. And in department and education field, we should see sales and marketing with only uppercase first letter. So like this, you can see that marketing and sales, they have the right values that we needed them to have. So you see, we don't need to write these case statements. We don't have to repeat the logic. All we did was we just have this one place where we are defining how to clean up the strings, and we can just apply this on any columns. So we can apply these on job roles, job satisfaction, anywhere that you like, so that we don't have to repeat these logic again and again. So you see how easy it is when it comes to macros. So for all of these columns, let's just do this quickly. So for gender also, we can just apply this. So I'm going to apply this on gender. Let's do this quickly. So I have clean strings, and then inside this we're going to say gender. Then the next is we can do this on business travel. We could have done like we remove these special characters, but because I've not added that logic, so I don't want to complicate it, let us do this in job role. So I'm going to remove this logic from job role and place the logic in here. So I'm going to say clean strings and then pass job role. And I'm going to apply the same logic for marital status. So I'm going to remove this from here and go into marital status. And here again, clean strings and then marital status. Let's remove it from here. So you see now I have removed a few lines of code, 10-20 lines of code, and replaced it with just few words over here. So you see how powerful these macros are. And then again we can just run these statements and verify everything is running fine. The model has been created successfully. So this was the first use case. I would suggest you to come up with a use case of your own similar to this one. Try to apply it. If you cannot figure it out, come back to this video and rewatch this. And if you still can't figure it out, put your question in the comments below. I promise I'll get back to you. Now let us move on to our second use case. Now let us start with our second use case, which is enforce business logic. So in here, we used an example of active users, but for our use case, because we are dealing with HR data, so we have a column which is called as monthly income. So what we can do is we can use this to understand how we can enforce business logic. When it comes to monthly income, we might have to group these into buckets like low, medium, high. So this is business logic enforcement. What income is considered as low income, medium income, or high income? This is business logic. So we can enforce this using a macro. So what we can do is we will have income bands, and these income bands will be created using macros. If the income is between 2,000 to 10,000, then this is low. If it is between 10,000 to 20,000, then it is medium. And if it is above 20,000, then we will consider this as high. So we're going to write this logic and enforce this using a macro. While we are writing a macro for this, it is important to understand this as well, because these income bands, we could be using these in multiple places. Instead of writing this logic again and again, we are going to write this in a macro and reference that macro in all the models which need these income bands. This will solve two purposes. First, we don't need to repeat this logic again and again in different models. And the second is, if business decides to change these income bands, let's say later on it is decided that anything which is between 2,000 to 15,000 is low, then we don't have to go into multiple models and make those updates. We can just come to this particular macro and update things, and all the models which are using this macro will get automatically updated. So this is how macro helps us in reducing the repeatability of the code and also helping us maintain the code better. Now before I show you this macro, I want to highlight an important design principle in DBT. I have already mentioned this before, but as best practices, we should avoid embedding any business logic in the bronze layer or even in the silver layer. These layers, they are just meant for cleaning, standardizing, or just light transformations. The gold layer is where the business logic will belong to, like these KPIs, aggregations, and these income bands. These should all be defined in the gold layer. However, since we have not built gold layer, we have actually not completed our silver layer as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate this macro using an ad hoc model. The goal here is not the model itself, like how we are using, why we are using, etc. I want to show you how we can use this macros functionality in this ad hoc model right now, and when we will be creating our gold layer, then we can obviously be referencing and creating more of these macros. So for now, I'm just going to show this using an ad hoc model, and later we will again be incorporating these in our gold layers. Now let us move to our DBT project and start creating this macro. As always, because we have to create a macro, so we are going to go into this macros folder. I'm going to right click and create a new file, and I'm calling this income band.sql. And now we'll start writing the macro. To start a macro, we put curly braces, then put %, and in between we first have to write macro. This tells DBT that we are writing a macro, and then we have to give macro its name. So I'm again going to call this income band, and then we have to pass some parameters. So for us, it would just be a column name. And let's end the macro as well. To end the macro, we again have curly braces, then %, and then we write end macro. Now in between we have to write the logic, because we just have to provide these case statements. If it is between 2000 to 10,000, then low, and all of these things. So these are mere case statements. So I'm just going to say case when this column name, now I cannot just use column name, so I'll have to do curly braces and then column name. When this column name, whatever the column is coming in over here, is greater than 2000, and this column name, so whatever the column is coming in, is less than 10,000, then we have to say it is low. Then I can just repeat this over here. So I'm just going to copy this and paste this here. When this is greater than 10,000, let's do equal to over here, and less than or equal to 20,000, then we are going to say medium. Oops. Then we are going to say medium, else we are going to say it is high. So this is all the logic that we wanted, and we have to end the case statement as well. So I'll write end over here, and let's save this. So all this is doing is, when we are going to call this macro income band, we're going to pass a column name from there, which will be our monthly income column. And then this will be replaced by case when the monthly income is greater than 2000 and monthly income is less than 10,000, then it is low. When monthly income is greater than 10,000 and monthly income is less than 20,000, then it is medium, otherwise it is high. So let's save this. And now we can create ad hoc models in this analysis folder. This folder does not create any models, it's just for doing some ad hoc queries. So I'm going to create a new file over here, and I'm going to say demo2.sql. In this model, we are doing very simple thing. We are calling this silver clean HR data with lookup values model, and we will just be fetching the employee number, their monthly income, and then we will be getting the bands. This is not a very useful model, but I just wanted to show you this functionality of macro. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say with base as, and then we're going to write our CTE, select star from, and I'm going to use the ref keyword. So we have to write two curly braces and then ref, and then we have to add our silver model name, and then all I'm doing is select employee number, then monthly income, and then I'm going to call our macro. So to call macro, we do curly braces, and then in here I'm going to get the macro name and then pass the column. So we want to do this on monthly income. We have to pass this inside single quotes, and I'm calling this as income bands from base. So all we have done is we have got this model, and we are fetching only two things from here, employee number and monthly income, and then I'm calling the macro monthly income bands, macro income bands with the on this monthly income column to get the bands. Now let me just save this and show you the compiled version. So if you see over here on the right hand side, this ref has been replaced by the database name, schema name and the table in our Snowflake, and then we are getting the employee number, monthly income, and then this income band monthly income has been replaced by the case statements that we have written in our macro. So these are our income bands. So you see how easy it is. If we have to, let's say there was another model demo3.sql and we have to again form these income bands, so we don't have to write these case statements. All we have to do is just write this single line, and DBT is going to convert these into case statements by using that macro that we have defined. And later on, if we decide to change the bands, like if it is between 2000 to 15,000, all we have to do is go into this macro and update this macro to have 15,000 over here and 15,000 over here, and our work is done. We don't have to go into individual models and then change these income bands. So you see how easy it is with macros to enforce this business logic. So now let us just run our model. So you will see we will have 3 columns over here, and hopefully we'll get the right bands. So if you see the first employee number, income was 19,000 and it is medium, which is right. Second employee, which was 24,000 monthly income, it is high. And the fourth employee number 4 is with 2,000 income and it is income band low. So you see that we have the right income bands using these macros. Now let us move on to our third use case. Now for the third use case, we have to define the environment specific config. So what I have thought about this is we're going to just fetch the data from this HR Analytics database. So there is already a database for us, HR Analytics, from where we were fetching the data from this staging schema, and then we were creating the bronze and silver layers in this database itself. But as next steps, we are not going to do this. We are only going to fetch data from this staging, and these bronze, silver and gold layers, or these models along with their schemas, they will be created in these 2 separate databases. The dev work, that is the development work, will be done in the dev_HR_analytics database, and later on when we are happy that these are the models without any bugs and the right features that we want them to be in, then we are going to push them into prod_HR_analytics database, from where the other stakeholders can access these models. So as prerequisite, we first have to create these 2 databases in Snowflake. Why? Because DBT will not create databases for you. These databases should already exist in your Snowflake, but the rest of the schemas and the tables that are required to be created in these databases, that can be handled by DBT. So let us first create these databases, and to do that, we just have to run a simple command. So let's go into our Snowflake. I'm going to create a new file, new databases, and then I'm just going to say create database, and I have dev_HR_analytics, and similarly I'm going to have create database prod_HR_analytics. So these are the 2 databases that I'm going to create. Now if I refresh over here, these should be visible. So you see this dev and the prod version. And now we have to grant some privileges as well. So I'll have to do grant all privileges on database, our database name, that is dev to role DBT role, and similarly I'll have to do this for the other database as well. So prod HR analytics to DBT rule. Now let us just run these one by one. This allows DBT to create all the schemas and tables, whatever are required. It has all the right privileges. Now that we have done this, let's move on to our DBT project folder, and here I'm going to write the macro. I'm going into macros folder, creating a new SQL file. I'm going to call this getDatabase.sql. So I'll start the macro by curly braces and then percent, and then we have to say macro and then get the macro name. So get database, and then I have to pass the parameter. So all we need from here is we just need to pass one argument. I'm going to call this env, which environment we are in, that's what we need to pass. If we are in dev environment, then dev. If we are in prod, then prod. And let's end this macro. So again, curly braces, percent, and in here we say end macro. Now here we are going to write our logic. So I will have to have if statements. So for again if statements, we have to write curly braces and percent sign, and then we can just say if our env, whatever this variable is equal to prod, then what I want is prod underscore HR underscore analytics. This should be my database name. Then we can say percent elif. My environment is dev. Then the name should be dev underscore HR underscore analytics. And then I can just write the else statements. So else, we can just have HR underscore analytics, and then we can do end if. So again percent end if. So all we have written is whatever this env is, if it is prod, then we want prod HR analytics to be our database. If it is dev, then we want staging HR analytics to be our database. But if we are not passing any of these, then the fallback strategy is we go into our HR analytics database, which we were currently working on. Now let us just save this. So this is a simple macro. We just have one argument and then we have these outputs. Now we can define a default value for this env, and we can define this in dbt underscore project.yml file. So let's go to our dbt underscore project.yml file over here. And I don't know why it's coming in red, but let's just define the variable over here. So to define variable, we use the vars keyword, and then we can define env because this is what we were naming it, and I'm going to say it is dev by default so that we don't accidentally push things into prod database. So I have defined this over here, and now it's time to use these databases. So now let's open our HR bronze model. So I'm going into here and opening bronze HR data, and I can write a config block over here. So I'm going to say double curly braces and then config, and then we can define the database should be equal to our get database macro. So we can just say get database, and then we can pass var env. So this will always pick up the default value unless we override it with prod. Now the rest of the things will be taken care by the DBT project. So if we go to models, materialized would be view, schema would be bronze. These config will be picked up from the dbt underscore project.yml file. The only config that we have changed is the database name. Let me show you this. I'm refreshing here, and currently in our dev HR analytics we just have these two schemas, and in our prod HR analytics also we just have these two schemas. But now you will see that in our dev, when I will run the dbt run command, we will have the bronze schema and the bronze table created, over the bronze model created over here. So let's go over here, go to our terminal, and then I'm just going to do dbt run. Let me just run the bronze HR data and not all the models. Now because I have just done dbt run, the var variable, there is some problem over here. Okay, I know what the problem is. Let's go back to our macro, which is get database. I need to write equal to over here. because this is a comparison that we are doing. Now let us just save this and run this again. So currently our vars is equal to def like dev. So this database should be picked up, and if you see here, our model was created as a view in dev HR analytics bronze HR data. So if I refresh over here, you can see bronze schema and our bronze model created as a view over here. So you see that using this we were able to point it into the right database. Now what if I need to push this into prod because I'm happy with the bronze model? So all I need to do here is a very simple change. I need to do dbt run. I can say vars, and in here I can pass env and can say this env is equal to prod, and then I can just run select bronze underscore HR underscore data. I'm doing this select because I just want to run this model and not all the other models. So now when we do this, now we are saying that this vars should be equal to prod instead of dev. And now you see we created a view model in prod HR analytics bronze HR data. So currently you don't see anything over here, but as soon as I refresh, you can see that our model got created in the prod HR analytics, and our stakeholders can access this prod HR data and can view these bronze models. So you see that we were able to point data to the right database depending on which environment we were in. If we were not using this macro, then what we had to do was going to this bronze HR data model, and then here we had to manually write prod HR analytics or dev HR analytics every time we were trying to build these models. And what if accidentally sometime, I don't remember that, instead of pushing into prod, I need to push this into dev and I post the wrong model in the wrong environment. So to avoid those problems, we can use the macro, and we just have to decide whether we want to push into dev environment or the prod environment, and the work will be done by macro for us. So you see how easy it is to tackle these things. There are a lot more things to cover in terms of environments, and we're going to see those in the later video, but this was just to give an overview of how macros help to switch between the two environments without any manual work. The last use case that we are covering for macros is generic tests. We have already defined generic tests as tests in the test folder, but in that video I mentioned that instead of putting these in test folder, we can also put these in the macros folder because the functionality is kind of very similar. We have to pass two arguments to generic test, which is model and column name, which makes it reusable content. So that is why we can define these in macros as well, because essentially macros are just dynamic SQL content. For demonstrating this use case, I'm going into the bronze models, and in here we have a column called as age. We already have a test defined on age, which is test less than 18, but I want to change this test to define a range for this particular age. We want the range to be from 18 to 100. If it is less than 18 or more than 100, then we want those rows to be flagged, because then it means there is something wrong. So I'm going to define this type of generic test in the macros folder. So I'm going into macros folder, creating a new file, and I'm going to call this test custom range, because this test is not just limited to age. We can apply this test on any other column where a range constraint has to be placed. So I'm calling this test custom range, and you see that I'm defining this in the macros folder .sql. We are defining a macro, like we are putting in the macros folder, but we have to define this as a test, not as a macro. So I'm going to add % keyword over here, and then we have to say test, because it is a test in a macros folder. And then we just have to define the name. So I'm going to call this test custom range. And for generic tests, we know that we have to pass an argument called model and another argument called column name. These are the two which are needed, and then we can pass additional arguments like min value, because we need to set the min value, and then max value as well. Now I'm going to end this test. So again, in curly braces and % we can say end test. And now in here we are going to define the logic. Now because we have to fetch rows which do not adhere to this particular range, so I'm going to say select star from, and then we need to pass our model name in curly braces so that it picks up the model that we are testing on, where, and then again in curly braces we have to write the column name so that it picks up the column whose range we want to decide. And we need to say we need to pick those rows which are less than this max value for this column, or we need to pick those rows which are greater than the max value defined for this column, max val. So we are picking those rows which are less than 18 or more than 100 for our age column. So I'm going to save this. Let's go into our bronze model.yml file, and here I'm going to define the test. So I'm replacing this test and I'm saying test custom range, and I'm going to change the description as well. This test checks if the age of the employee is between 18 and 100. Now we have to define those custom arguments as well. So I'm going to say arguments, and then the first one is min value, it should be 18, and then max value should be 100, and I'm saying the severity is 1. Let's control S. Now I have just made one mistake over here. I forgot to add curly braces over here, so do add curly braces because we want these minimum and maximum values to come over here. We don't want this exact term to be coming over here. These are variables and we want value of those variables. So this is what I have done. Now let us just save everything and run our DBT test. So I'm just going to run this particular test, and to do this what we can do is we can say DBT test -- select, and then we can pass these like how we do it in SQL, test custom range. This was the test. So what we are saying is anything which you see like this, you run that, and we have only defined it on age, so it's only going to run that for age. I don't want to run all the other tests and confuse, so that's why I'm just running this test. And now when you will see over here, you see that test custom range bronze HR data age 118, it has been tested and it has been successfully passed. So this is how you define generic test inside macros folder, and then this is how you can just run one test. I hope I was able to clear all of these 4 use cases as to how they are implemented. And lastly, I want to cover the topic of how we can document things about macro. So similar to how we were doing this for sources, for models, we were creating YAML files. So for macros also, we can create the YAML file and store it in the macros folder. So I'm going to go into macros, create a file. I'll just call this properties.yml. Let's just rename and put an underscore at the very start so that it is at the top. And now we have to first write macros like we were doing seeds and models to tell that this is a macro. And then we're going to say name. So the first macro that I'm defining is clean strings. This was the name of the macro. Then we can write the description. So I'm going to say description. This macro is used to clean string columns. So whatever description that you want to give. Then we can define the arguments that are going into this macro. So we first define the name. So going into clean strings macro, we just have a column name argument. So let's go back to our properties.yml. We write column name, and then we can define the description for this one as well. So description. This is the column that you need to clean. So whatever description you want to write, and type, this is actually a column, so we can just write column. Let's do this for the others as well. So I have added all the macros and their description over here. So this is again a YAML file because we are defining properties of the macro. We are defining metadata about the macro. So I have added all of these. I did not want to waste time writing these over here, so have written these. I will post this on my GitHub repository in our DBT repository, so you can get all of this from over there. Before going, like I said in the start, that we already had a schema underscore name macro that we used in our earlier videos. So I want to explain that as well, and I guess you would have understood this by now. So we are defining a macro which is generate schema name, and we are getting the custom schema name from dbd underscore project.yml file, or wherever we have defined the schema config for seeds or for whatever models. Then what we are saying is, if our default, we are setting the default schema as target.schema, whatever schema that we have defined in the target in profiles.yml. If our custom schema is not present, if this is none, then we are going to use the default schema. But if it is present, then we're going to say we want custom schema name, and we're going to trim any spaces if there are any. Earlier here it was default schema name underscore custom schema name. That's how it was provided by DBT, but we removed that part because we just wanted bronze. We don't want staging underscore bronze or any other thing like the default schema name that we have defined. We don't want that. So that's why we did this. And then we have these if statements, else statements, end if, and then end macro. So I'm sure you would have understood the concept by now. I would highly recommend you think of a few other scenarios, try to implement them. If you don't know the answer, put your questions in the comments, and as always, I will get back to you. If you found this video helpful, then please share it with others. Thank you for watching. I will see you in my next one.